Roll call for the 12th Legislative Day, January 26th, 2023. Anderson. Baldwin. Barlow. Whiteman. Boner. Bouchard. Brennan. Case. Cooper. Dockstetter. Ellis. French. Furphy. Garou. Excused. Hicks. Present.
Excuse rejected.
Hutchings.
She's just on the floor.
Present. Aye. Aye, present. Jones. Kinski. Kinski. Excused. Kolb. Landon. Larson. McCune. Nethercott. Pappas. Rothfuss. Salazar. Schuler. Scott. Steinmetz. President Driscoll.
Here.
Anderson. Excused. Mr. President, 27 present, 4 excused.
Thank you. Prayer by Reverend Rick Veit, St. Mark's Episcopal.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to offer you an amended prayer from the 4th century. Let us pray. Almighty God, you have given us grace at this time with one accord to make our common supplication to you. And you have promised that when 2 or 3 are gathered together in your name, you will be in the midst of them. Fulfill now, O Lord, our desires and petitions as may be best for us and for the people of Wyoming, granting us in this world knowledge of your truth and inspiring us to take proper action, especially for those in greatest need. For it's in your one and holy name that we pray. Amen.
Senator Landon, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Reading of the journal.
Mr. President, your journal committee reports that the journal of January 25 has been read and recommends that it be approved. Senator Larson, chairman.
Any objections? There being none, the report is adopted. We're back to no doctor of the day again. This is a healthy crew. We just don't need doctors around here at all. But we do have Senator Baldwin in the back if any of you are feeling bad. And we have a veterinarian if you want to go to an alternative source. Representative Barlow. Senator Barlow, I'm sorry to degrade you. Today in Wyoming history, man is arrested between Deaver and Cowley for manufacturing intoxicating liquor. I'm sure that wasn't the only still running in the state at the time. We may have all come from different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. Martin Luther King Jr. Does that feel familiar, folks? Final date for bills to be introduced today by 5 p.m. Folks, we have something pretty special here today. I've got to pull up on my phone a picture here so I get my stuff done right here. So we have old family friend of my wife's family, Gerald Shippen is a sculptor. Sitting on the front desk is, come on in. Sitting on the front desk is a clay that's going to be a model for, I believe, a life size, he'll probably tell you, of Senator Hank Coe, who used to sit back in the corner where Senator Dockstedter's at. I'm talk a little bit about it, but it'll go in the Hank Coe Terminal Building at Yellowstone Regional Airport in Cody. And Coe was in District 18, which most of you don't need to know this, from 89, represented Park County from 89 to 2020, and was president of the Senate in 2001 and 2. Senate Majority Floor Leader 99, 2000, and Vice President 97, 98. One of our legends that came out of this body, done incredible things for all of us. I'm going to invite Mr. Chippen up to say a couple words about it, and I encourage you all to come take a look. It'll be on display a day or two, and I'm guessing he's going to generate some about that size, and then he'll have the life-size one come out. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Chippen.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank Senator Driscoll for this opportunity to present this sculpture of Senator Coe. And my work in Wyoming goes back quite a long ways to the 1970s. And so it's an honor all these years later to be here speaking to you. This sculpture will be cast in bronze, and it'll be life-size of Hank, and it'll stand in front of the new terminal. It's a remodel of the terminal building in Cody, and it's a major project, and it'll be cast in bronze. And if anyone wants to be part of the project, they're welcome to contact Hank's son, H.R. Coe. And so hopefully a little bit later on this year or next year, we'll be unveiling the finished work there at the Cody Airport. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I got one of these for you.
Oh, thanks very much. Excellent. Thank you.
Messages from the House.
From the House of Representatives, January 25, 2023, message number 138. Mr. President, House Bill number 93, Omnibus Water Bill Construction, passed the House on third reading in an amended form. Ayes 56, noes 5, excused 1. Signed, Katie Talbot, House Chief Clerk.
Thank you. Introduction, reading, and reference of bills. Senate File 135, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 135, Repeal Gun-Free Zones, Government Buildings and Meetings, sponsored by Senator Bouchard.
Senate File 135 is referred to Committee Number 3, Revenue. Senate File 148, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 148, Preemption of Local Firearms Regulations, sponsored by Senator Kinski.
Senate File 148 is referred to Committee Number 3, Revenue. Senate File 149, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 149, Enhanced Concealed Carry Permit for Improved Reciprocity, sponsored by Senator Kinski.
Senate File 149 is referred to Committee Number 3, Revenue. Senate File 150, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 150, Capital Carry, sponsored by Senator Kinski.
Senate File 150 is referred to Committee Number 3, Revenue. Senate File 171, first reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 171, Wyoming Second Amendment Financial Privacy Act, sponsored by Senator Larson.
Senate File 179 is referred to Committee Number 3, Revenue. Senate File 140, Senate File 171 is referred to Committee Number 3, Revenue. Thank you. Senate File 144, first reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 144, Chloe's Law, Children Gender Change Prohibition, sponsored by Senator Bouchard.
Senate File 144 is referred to Committee Number 10, Labor Health. Reports from standing committees.
January 25, 2023. Mr. President, your Committee Number 8, Transportation, Highways, and Military Affairs, to whom is referred Senate File 141, Transportation Technology Transfer Center Program Funding. Respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Boner, Brennan, Furphy, Kolb, and Pappas. Senator Boner, Chairman. January 25, 2023, Mr. President, your Committee Number 8, Transportation, Highways, and Military Affairs, to whom was referred Senate Joint Resolution 5, Air Force 75th Anniversary. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Boner, Brennan, Furphy, Kolb, and Pappas. Senator Pappas, Acting Chairman.
Thank you, Randy. Now, we're going to go through a pretty lengthy list of re-referrals between committees, so for all of you, pay attention and you'll get them redone, but we're kind of balancing the load. This is, for everybody out there, it isn't done for nefarious reasons, just so we can kind of get through them. First one is, we're going to re-refer Senate File 119, defund the Guard, from Transportation, Number 8, to Revenue, Number 3. We are going to re-refer, without objection, it is so ordered. Mr. President. Senator Boner. Debatable. Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's probably a mistake of mine to not talk to you about that good senator from Converse County, Natrona County. We had a little discussion yesterday with one of the people that was going to testify, and we sort of discussed that a little bit. And then I talked this morning about it, and my mistake, and I apologize to the good senator from Converse County.
What is your preference? It's going to go to a vote unless I retract it at this point.
My preference is to move it to revenue.
Okay.
Thank you.
So it's been objected. All in favor of the re-referral from Senate File 119? Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you. So it would need to be a motion that's made at that point in time, and that motion can be made. That motion will be debatable.
I did make the motion.
Okay.
That was mine without
Gotcha.
objection, and they objected.
Okay.
So,
well,
thank you.
Mr. President, I think it would be in order, and I'm going to resist the motion to move it at this time because there hasn't been a conversation about it among the two chairs. I think as far as a general practice of the chamber, at the very least, the two chairs of the respective committees should have a conversation before we stand up and vote on this, and should come to an agreement if they want to come to an agreement, and then should be prepared to debate it if they don't want to come to an agreement, and we haven't gotten there. So I'm going to be inclined to resist motions to move that aren't agreed to by both chairs.
Thank you, Senator Rothfuss. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Without a motion, we will lay this back till this afternoon. We'll get the parties together and we'll visit about it. So we started out on a rough one. Now we'll continue on. Thank you. Re-referral of Senate File 126 from corporations to 7 corporations to Committee Number 5, Agriculture, without objection. Re-referral of Senate File 131, Prohibition on Delivery of Unsolicited Ballot Forms, from corporations to Committee 5, Ag. Senator Case.
President, thank you very much, Mr. President. We worked that bill this morning. We're kind of in the middle of it. I think
It will stay. I
we're
knew
almost there.
Okay.
We're almost there.
It will stay there. We're going to run into multiples of those. This
Sure.
list is from
Keep 'em coming.
yesterday, so any of them just stand up, speak up, we'll withdraw that motion and it stays where it's at.
Keep them coming, sir.
And I think there's more of those going to be the same way because my list really was from last night, folks. Re-referral of Senate File 138, unemployment insurance coverage and reporting from corporations, number 7, to Ag, number 5. Without objection, re-referred. Re-referral of Senate File 139, unlawful use of a charge or debit card from corporations, number 7, to transportation, number 8. Without objection, so ordered. Seeing funny looks at the back. Folks, these were done by our committee people themselves. This isn't a choice of mine. This was, we let the committees do them. So just so you understand, this is how this went. Wasn't picks that are made by me. Re-referral of Senate File 160, tolling authority for I-80 from corporations, number 7, to transportation, number 8.
No objection.
Thank you. Re-referral without objection of Senate File 164, Public Improvement Contract Requirement Amendments from 7 corporations to number 8, transportation. Without objection, it is so ordered. Re-referral of Senate File 173, Financial Institutions, similar name, from Committee number 7, Corporations, to Committee number 6, Travel. Without objection, so ordered. Re-referral of Senate File 176, Solid Waste Disposal Districts, Consolidation, from Committee number 7, Corporations, to Committee number 6, Travel. Re-referral of Senate File 157, Weed and Pest Mitigation Tribal Inclusion 2, from Labor Health 10 to Committee number 6, Travel, Recreation, and Wildlife. I believe that is the re-referrals. I thank you for your patience on it. This should get our load. The Senate's done a nice job, folks. We got the committees balanced out now. Virtually every bill is going to be heard this year. Senator Anderson, do you need some? Bills on second reading. Senate File 33, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 33, defining aircraft for purposes of hunting prohibitions.
Senate File 33, having been heard 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be heard a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 109, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 109, prohibiting chemical abortions.
Senate File 109, having been heard 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be heard a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 113, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 113, Architects Practice Act amendments.
Senate File 113, having been heard 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be heard a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 117, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 117, parental rights in education.
It has an amendment. Could we have the amendment read in?
Senate File 117, second reading amendment number 1, page 3, line 3, delete.
Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I forgot about this one. I move second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 117 and ask for your favorable recommendation. This was pointed out by LSO yesterday. After I divided the amendment, I didn't divide it correctly. So this is a technical correction to our divided amendment yesterday. Just ask for your favorable vote. Not a whole lot to discuss about it. It's a technical correction, so.
Question being called. We're voting on Second Amendment number 1 to Senate File 117. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The amendment is passed. Did you move the amendment? I want to make sure we did get, okay, thank you. My bad. We're back on the bill. Senate File 117 having been heard 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be heard a third without objection? It is so ordered. Senate File 134, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 134, Right to Farm Real Estate Disclosures.
There is an amendment. Can we have the amendment read in?
Senate File 134, second reading amendment number 1, page 3, line 9, delete.
Senator Jones.
Mr. President, I move second reading amendment 1 to Senate File 134 and ask for your favorable consideration. As a current Wyoming licensed realtor and broker for approximately 25 years, I bring this amendment to simplify the disclosure while making certain that buyers receive and understand the importance of our agricultural heritage. Using the statutory reference as opposed to a laundry list ensures that if practices evolve or change, we don't have to come back and add to or delete from our laundry list. We have no other laundry list disclosures required in Wyoming currently. The important part is that we have that discussion with potential buyers, and this amendment accomplishes the mission of the bill. The reality is when there are wordy, lengthy disclosures, no one reads them. This language starts the discussion and gives the appropriate notification. I've received support for this language from agricultural industries as well as real estate professionals. Again, I ask for your favorable consideration.
Thank you. Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. President. There are decades of thought in this bill, in my original bill, in the original language. It butts up against a lot of court cases, a lot of fights, probably even some blood. I know a lot of tears. The reason that this bill has this specific disclosure is because these are the basic issues when you have a residential area that comes up against a agricultural area. And there are some cases around the country where the agriculture people got so mad about what was going on that they put signs up that said, notice, this property is a farm. Farms have animals, make funny sounds, smell bad, have sex outdoors. Unless you can tolerate noise, odors, and outdoor sex, don't buy property next to a farm. And the people that go by that sign laugh at it, but it gets to the heart of what's going on here. And if you take some of the fights that have been in states where you have multiple disclosures because every county did it different, then there's even more problem. You have problems over county line. That's what this bill does. We take a preemption here, and if you remember in the bill, it says at a minimum. I mean, honestly, if you have a pig farm and you're a realtor, you better know that wind pattern. You better know what's going on, because if you sell that to somebody and you don't put it on that disclosure, if you just go with this basic disclosure that's warm and fuzzy, there could be a fight that comes up and you'll be in the middle of a lawsuit. And that's what my bill is. You know, so I heard one of the arguments against this bill is we want fewer laws. I want fewer lawsuits. I want the people that have a right to farm to be protected in Wyoming, because it's not if, Mr. President, it's when it comes to this state. And my bill is grounded in decades of fights, court battles. I don't think there's a problem with it. And quite frankly, if we look at the amendment, it says, it says right in it, practices that may interfere with the perceived quiet enjoyment. Well, I don't think this amendment goes far enough at what it's trying to do. Because, I mean, it should say, you know, you should not like maybe you should smell some manure before deciding you don't like it. I mean, that's what this is, sugar-coated of what's really going on. There's nothing wrong with what's going on a piece of agricultural land. And my disclosure talks about some of those issues. Pesticides are being sprayed, and I know people that do that, and they do it in accordance with the law, and then they have to come and fight with someone who may not agree with the practice. So it's a real problem. I would ask the body to resist this amendment. The first amendment was brought in committee by the organization that represents the salespeople. I'm a licensed salesperson as well. But I understand this fight. This fight's real. It's a 50-state fight. We're coming in the tail end here. And just like the famous hockey player who said that he was so successful because he skated to where the puck was going, not to where it's been. We need to, this is the upper chamber, this is the Senate. I don't think we should play the games that we see down the hallway with worrying about what a lobby group says on a certain issue like this, on sales. We should be telling people the truth and letting them make a decision on their own. They're adults, they can handle it. They can handle a piece of paper that says
20
manure.
seconds.
It can handle a piece of paper that says manure or pesticides. Resist the amendment, vote no. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and for the amendment. I think it cleans up the bill nicely and it gets to the intent we were working on in the committee. It addresses what the intent of the bill is, which is to disclose, while also making sure that we're not hamstringing people who are working in this industry and profession. And so this is just a minimum. If they want to disclose more, they certainly can, but they don't have to disclose more than this. So thank you, Mr. President, on and for.
Further discussion. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, on and against the amendment, but you know, it seems to me that there's got to be some middle ground compromise here where I understand the concerns of those that are bringing the amendment. But at the same time, it's clear the intent of the amendment it really is to sugarcoat and make sure that there's nothing scary about this disclosure. Oh, everything's fine, no worries. There's just some statutes you have to worry about, and there might be some problems with perceived quiet enjoyment. To me, that reads like either ag operators or realtors wrote it because it favors them, right? Pushing the thumb down on one side. But I do understand that there are concerns with the original bill as written as well, which might seem overly zealous in saying that, boy, it sure is awful to live next to a farm or ranch, which also is not something we necessarily need to imply. So I get it, and I also understand that we have certainly the right to farm and ranch in Wyoming and that we have statutory construct. I'd sure like to see a third reading amendment that tries to thread the needle and actually kind of reflects the reality that, yes, there might be some smells, noises, and other such things if you live next to a farm and ranch, and that people should be informed of that, and there might be some spraying for weeds and other things. So maybe being realistic from that side, but maybe that doesn't go as far. So I'm going to resist this amendment in hopes that a third reading amendment occurs that is kind of balanced And remember, it has to be in the interest of both parties. It has to appropriately and realistically reflect everybody involved in the transaction as a disclosure. And this one reads to me like it's the pendulum swinging a little too far the other way. There was a good president of the Senate a few years ago that used to like to say, if it's worth reacting to, it's worth overreacting to. And I think that's what this amendment does. On and against.
Senator Nethercott.
Mr. President, thank you. In reviewing the amendment, I mean, candidly, I can't imagine it to be more expressly stated. One, it is telling the purchaser of real estate, which one would assume has some level of sophistication in order to get the funding associated with what is likely a large project, that hopefully they already know. The property is located within 1 mile of farm and ranch lands, as defined by Wyoming statute. You are hereby on notice that you're buying land right next to a ranch operation, if you didn't know that already. So this is somewhat a little bit outside of our libertarian ways of really doing a lot of hand-holding for a purchaser of real estate. Then it says, provides legal advice, arguably. Wyoming is a right to farm state, as detailed in Wyoming statute 1144-103 and 44-104, provides the statutory direction for what that means. It's pretty helpful. Then it further provides what that statute says and does, arguably, again, providing legal advice, which state a preference for and protects customary agricultural practices and farm and ranch operations. It tells the purchaser that farm and ranch operations are protected under state law in Wyoming. Again, this is expressly clear. Neighboring agricultural practices may interfere with your perceived quiet enjoyment of your property. Again, that's a term of art that's important to use, that quiet enjoyment. You've seen that previously this session. But is protected by Wyoming statutes referenced in this notice, right? So despite that you may have the quiet enjoyment of your property be interrupted by the practices of farm or ranch operations, which may or may not be a nuisance as listed, but subjectively interfere with your quiet enjoyment of property, is still not protected. It's pretty succinctly stated, and I share the sentiments of the bringer of the amendment, that for a purchaser of real estate to read 5 lines that clearly is more effective than skimming through 5 more pages. And so I do think this does accomplish clarity for both the purchaser and the neighboring landowners. I don't think it's as scary, and I think it's actually very intelligently and artfully written for both parties.
Vice President Kinski.
Thank you. Thank you. I recently bought something, I don't know what it was. I opened it up and it had important safety instructions. Went on for 6 pages. I didn't bother to read them. Goes on for 6 pages. Similarly, we recently closed on a piece of property. Here's the lead paint disclosure, here's the interest rate disclosure, here's the this. I didn't read any of that. You either want to buy it or you don't. And it reminds me, I took a course on consumer protection. And the professor said, studies show the longer the disclosure, the less likely it will be read. This amendment, I think, saves the bill. I think it saves the intent of the bill. Somebody will read that 1 paragraph. They're not going to read that other page. It'll just go into the pile with the lead paint disclosure and all the other disclosures. There's a chance that maybe this would be read. I think this amendment is a tremendous improvement to the bill, on and for the amendment.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good senator from Laramie County that's bringing this bill. I like the bill, but I just don't like, I was the one in committee that mentioned that, you know, I don't think we need more laws. This is more, there's an old Latin saying, caveat emptor. It means buyer beware. And just trying to thin out the paperwork that we push out of this place. So Thank you, Mr. President.
Further comments? Further comments? For your second time, Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, that word perceived, how about, how many people would perceive that there's tractors running 24 hours a day, or there's other parts of the operation that are 24 hours a day? And that's what the problem here is. We're not talking about the issues. And quite frankly, I take offense to this, we're hand-holding with the buyer. This isn't about the buyer. This is about the farm or ranch owner that has to get a lawyer and defend themselves against someone who had the wrong perceptions of what they were buying. And that's why the language was stated as it was, about 24-hour operations, tractors, lights, smells. These are things that happen on a farm, on a ranch. I can't stress enough how these cases have been through the courts. This isn't something new that I just pulled out of a hat. They're standing cases that have went through the courts. This particular language, I took it because statewide that different counties had different disclosures, and it was a mess to keep track of from one real estate association, and they all compromised, and that's what they came up with. I do agree somewhat with the senator from the Ivory Tower. I'm willing to do something, but I'm not going to go that far, let the pendulum swing that far. That's why I say resist this amendment. This takes away the guts of the bill to protect the right to farm. Thank you.
Further comments? Question being called. We're on second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 134. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Chairs in doubt. All in favor, please stand. Those opposed, please stand. Vote is 17 to 14. Second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 134 has passed the Senate. Senate File 134 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 136, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 136, Property Tax Relief Assessment Rate Reduction.
There is an amendment. Do we have the amendment read?
Senate File 136.
Senator Biteman, 1 second, please.
Mr. President, without objection, I would ask that Senate File 136 be laid back 1 day.
That objection is so ordered. Senate File 136 is laid back for 1 day. Senate File 137, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 137, Subdivisions Fencing Requirements.
We didn't do the amendment. He just went right back. We'll go to a third. There is an amendment. We have the amendment read in.
Senate File 137, second reading amendment number 1, page 2, line 10, after.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 137 and ask for your aye vote. Fellow senators, all we're doing is cleaning this good little bill up a little bit. On page 2, line 10, after large, we're inserting unless a legal perimeter fence already exists at that location, so that we are crystal clear that if there's already a fence, you don't have to build another one. And on page 4, after line 20, we're creating a new subsection just saying the adjoining landowner shall not be liable for any damages caused by or arising from livestock pastured on the adjoining land that may wander into the subdivided land. So that is basically the amendment, and I would ask for your aye vote.
Question being called. We're on second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 137. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 137 has passed the Senate. Senate File 137, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Bills on third reading and final passage. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, do we have a consent list?
Mr. President, we do have a consent list. I move third reading consent list, which is follows. Senate File 17, off-road recreational vehicles, safety and insurance. Senate File 24, financial exploitation of vulnerable adults. Senate File 54, judges' housing allowances. Senate File 72, employees forced microchip implantation prohibited. Senate File 76, Wyoming Digital Asset Registration Act. Senate File 82, eligible water and sewer projects funding. Senate File 108, court reporter fees, district court discretion. And Senate File 116, protection of lawful commerce and firearms, Mr. President.
Would anyone like any of the bills removed from the consent list? Seeing none. Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass the Senate? Senate File 17, off-road recreational vehicles, safety and insurance. Senate File 24, financial exploitation of vulnerable adults. Senate File 54, judges, housing allowance. Senate File 72, employees forced microchip implantation prohibited. Senate File 76, Wyoming Digital Asset Registration Act. Senate File 82, eligible water and sewer projects funding. Senate File 108, court reporter fees, district court discretion. Senate File 116, protection of lawful commerce in firearms. The chief clerk will call the roll.
On the consent list, Anderson. Aye. Baldwin. Aye. Barlow. Aye. Beitman. Aye. Boner. Aye. Bouchard. Aye. Brennan. Aye. Case. Aye. Cooper. Aye. Dockstetter. Aye. Ellis. Aye. French. Aye. Furphy. Aye. Guru. Aye. Hicks.
Aye.
Hutchings. Aye. Ide. Aye. Jones. Aye. Kinski.
Aye.
Cole. Aye. Landon. Aye. Larson. Aye. McEwen. Aye. Nethercott. Aye. Pappas. Aye. Rothfuss. Aye. Salazar. Aye. Schuler. Aye. Scott. Aye. Steinmetz. Aye. President Driscoll.
Aye.
On the consent list, 31 aye. Senate File 17, are there any changes? Scott? Scott, no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 17, 30 aye, 1 no. Senate File 24, are there any changes? Beitman? No. Ide? No. No. Salazar? No. No. Larson? No. No. Kolb? No. McCune? No. Bouchard? No. French? Aye to no. Brennan? Aye to no. Closing vote. Closing Vote closed. Senate File 24, 22 aye, 9 no. Senate File 54, are there any changes? Bouchard? Aye to no. Boner? Aye to no. Case? Aye to no. McCune? Aye to no. Hutchings? Aye to no. French? Aye to no. Ide? Aye to no. Steinmetz? Aye to no. Kolb? Aye to no. Salazar? Aye to no. Beitman? Aye to no. Jones? Aye to no. Brennan? Aye to no. Ellis? Aye to no. Larson? Aye to no. Dockstetter? Aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 54, 15 aye, 16 no. Senate File 72, are there any changes? Case, aye to no.
Kinsky, I don't know.
Kinsky, aye to no.
Guru, I don't know.
Guru, aye to no. Barlow, aye to no.
Driscoll, I don't know.
Driscoll, aye to no. Cooper, Cooper, aye to no. Dockstetter, aye to no. Nethercott, aye to no. Ellis, aye to no. Schuler, aye to no. Anderson, aye to no. Baldwin, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 72, 19 aye, 12 no. Senate File 76, are there any changes? Hutchings? Aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 76, 30 aye, 1 no. Senate File 82, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 82, 31 aye. Senate File 108, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 108, 31 aye. And Senate File 116, are there any changes? Case, aye to no. Rothfuss?
Aye to no.
Aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 116, 29 aye, 2 no.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 17, Off-Road Recreational Vehicles, Safety and Insurance, Senate File 24, Financial Exploitation of Vulnerable Adults, Senate File 72, Employees Forced Microchip Implantation Prohibited, Senate File 76, Wyoming Digital Asset Registration Act, Senate File 82, Eligible Water and Sewer Projects Funding, Senate File 108, Court Reporter Fees, District Court Discretion, and Senate File 116, Protection of Lawful Commerce and Firearms have passed the Senate. Senate File 54, having failed to receive the affirmative vote of the majority of members elected to the Senate, Senate File 54 has failed to pass the Senate. Senate File 61, third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 61, Legislator per diem, sponsored by the Management Council, an act relating to per diem rates.
There is an amendment. Could we have the amendment read in, please?
Senate File 61, third reading amendment number 1, delete.
Senator Larson.
Mr. President, thank you. I move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 61 and ask for your favorable consideration. Thank you. Pretty much what this does is in section B on line 8, leaves everything in there that currently is in the bill, except at the very end it says the last 2 words, except that. And so then we go to little I, which pretty much states that during session, we will only get 100, well, I did it by percentage, and if we use the $155 that is currently the United States General Services Administration per diem rate, you would get 30% of that, minus that would be $108.50, which is real close to what we're getting right now, $109. So during session, we'd only get $109. I can make that work. My hotel's cheap enough that, and with food, I can live on that. During the rest of the session and during interim, we'd jump right back up to $155. The next part in little I2, this actually says that if you live within 25 miles of where we're at currently, where the state capitol is, or during interim committees, if that committee meeting's in your town, you could only get 25% of the per diem, which is nearly $40. This figures out $38.75. So I bring this just because by definition, per diem is the allowance for lodging, meals, and incidental expenses. And the big item, obviously, to everyone is lodging. If you're not needing lodging, why are you getting paid for it?
Further discussion? Seeing none. We are on third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 61. All in favor, Senator Case.
Just a point of order, and it's more of a question. Would this require a roll call? I think it might, because it affects.
This will, and to be safe, we will do a roll call.
Thank you.
Chief Clerk will call the roll. I'll agree from the chair that I think it's appropriate.
Third reading amendment number 1, Senate File 61, roll call. Anderson? No. Baldwin? No. Barlow? No. Whitman? Aye. Boner? No. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? No. Case? Aye. Cooper? No. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? No. French? Aye. Furphy? Aye. Guru? No. Hicks? No. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? No. Kinsky? No. Cole? No. Landon? No. Larson? Aye. McCune? Aye. Nethercott? No. Pappas? No. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? No. Scott? No. Steinmetz? No. President Driscoll?
Aye.
Aye. Hutchings? Yes, ma'am. Hutchings, aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. On the amendment, 12 aye, 19 no.
By your vote, third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 16 has failed the Senate. We're back on the bill. Question being called, roll call. I think I said 1661.
Third reading roll call, Senate File 61. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner? No. Bouchard? No. Brennan? Aye. Case? No. Cooper? Aye. Dockstetter? No. Ellis? No. French? No. Murphy? No. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? No. Ide? No. Jones? Aye. Kinski? No. Cole? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? No. McCune? No. Nethercott? No. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? No. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? No. President Driscoll?
Aye.
Aye. Beitman, aye to no. Closing vote. Ellis? No to aye.
Take that.
Closing vote. Closing vote closed. Senate File 61, 16 aye, 15 no.
Senate File 61, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 61, Legislator per diem, has passed the Senate. Senate File 112, third reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 112, Peer Support Counseling Confidentiality, sponsored by Senator Nethercott, an act relating to labor and employment.
There is an amendment. Can we have the amendment read in, please?
Senate File 112, third reading amendment number 1, page 1, line 1, delete.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 112 and ask for your favorable consideration. Good Senators, this was brought to my attention by LSO. It just provides some cleanup language associated with the purpose and intent of the bill. And so it's in line 1, or on page 1, lines 2 and 3, just provides clarity that we're not creating these peer services support teams, but rather ensuring that those communications are confidential. Good catch by LSO. Ask for your favorable consideration.
Seeing no further question being called, we're on third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 112. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 112 has passed the Senate. Back on the bill. Having been read 3 separate times, question, having been read 3 separate times, question is, shall Senate File 112 pass the Senate? Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Third reading roll call, Senate File 112. Anderson. Aye. Baldwin. Aye. Barlow. Aye. Beitman. Aye. Boner. Aye. Bouchard. Aye. Brennan. Aye. Case. Aye. Cooper. Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Furphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Aye. Kinski? Aye. Kolb? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? Aye. McCune? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 112, 31 aye.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 112, peer sport counseling confidentiality has passed the Senate. Senator Ellis.
Having voted on the prevailing side of Senate File 61, I move for immediate reconsideration of the third reading vote on Senate File 61.
Thank you. So we are back to Senate File 61. The first vote will be for reconsideration. The second vote, should it pass, will be back on Senate File 61. Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Roll call vote for reconsideration, Senate File 60 of Senate File 61. Anderson? No. Baldwin? No. Barlow? No. Beitman? No. Boner? No. Bouchard? Yes. Brennan? No. Case? No. Cooper? No. Dockstetter? No. Ellis? Aye. French? No. Furphy? Aye. Guru? No. Hicks? No. Hutchings? No. Ide? No. Jones? No. Kinski? Aye. Kolb? No. Landon? No. Larson? Aye. McCune? No. Nethercott? No. Pappas? No. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? No. Schuler? No. Scott? No. Steinmetz? No. President Driscoll?
No.
No. Closing vote. French, no to aye. Closing vote. Closing vote closed for reconsideration. 6 aye, 25 no.
The vote for reconsideration on Senate File 61 has failed the Senate. Senate File 114, third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 114, Constitutional Instruction and Examination Requirements, sponsored by Senator Larson, an act relating to education.
There is an amendment. Can we have the amendment read in, please?
Third reading amendment number 1, Senate File 114, page 2, line 17, delete.
Senator Hutchins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move third reading amendment to Senate File 114 and ask for, again, for your favorable consideration. Sensing the body felt that my amendment on second reading from going from the percentage of passage of this test that's already in our statute from 60% to 70% was quite low. I've decided, Mr. Chairman, to ask again that the body would vote yes on an amendment that would increase the percentage of passage on this test from 60% to 80%. That is my amendment, and I sit for questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Hicks.
Mr. President, on and for the amendment, and I think it was my colleague from Albany County over the Ivory Towers that convinced me this is probably the right thing to do when he talked about how remedial this test is and that just about anybody could pass it. But Mr. President, this is the same test that somebody comes and immigrates to this country does. I think we should have a reasonable expectation that our public school system should actually be able to pass a test at some level of proficiency, and especially given the explanation that it's not a very high bar of 80%. What's the harm, Mr. Chairman? What's the harm? We teach this already. There's a provision in statute that we're supposed to teach the Constitution. Shouldn't we just make sure that the teaching is actually effective? I think this gets to it. Multiple tests can be taken. It's nothing more, it's just as an educational process to make sure that our students, when they graduate, really do have an understanding of the Constitution of the United States. On and for the amendment.
Is there another call?
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a wonderful idea and a wonderful bill, and it certainly is something that we as Americans all agree with, right? This is why we require it of citizens intending, or immigrants intending to become citizens in this country. I think what's important as we have this discussion is recognizing what this bill is and what this bill isn't. This bill is just a statement, but it does have a consequence, right? Because we know, at least those of us who've been educated in this state, that our Wyoming public education did in fact teach us all of these core requirements. If you don't recall that, that's on you. But your teacher did in fact teach you about all the different branches of government. They did teach you about the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights. They went through all of these standards. And theoretically, if you have your high school diploma, you did in fact pass, and you did achieve this goal. So what we are doing by this is really political action for popularity about how we care about our Constitution. And by God, those Wyoming students, they're going to know a citizenship test. But what we're really doing is we're setting a precedent of which we're going to ask ourselves not to break in the future. We're dictating curriculum and we're dictating a passage rate for our students, as opposed to giving credit to those teachers who stand in front of this room, to our Department of Education, to our school boards, where this appropriately is. Certainly, we all agree that any Wyoming student graduating from Wyoming high school should have these proficiencies established. We have that current standards in our law now. And we all can do that as a result of that wonderful Wyoming public education we all received, or your children are receiving now. So let's just be honest about what we're doing here and recognize that one danger associated with really dictating, because what's the next thing? Everyone should learn their ABCs. Who disagrees with that? Are they not already teaching that with the level of proficiency and passage rate? I think they are. Every kindergartner should be able to sing their ABCs with 80% passage rate. If you're going to learn English, you better know that by the time you're in kindergarten. How popular would that be? Is it necessary, or is it just a statement? So we can continue doing these pieces and messing with education and causing continual burdens and stepping out of our lanes. Again, it's not that I don't agree that every Wyoming student should have significant proficiency in this area. It's the precedent we're setting by making political statements using our school system as the tool.
Senator Scott.
Mr. President, I don't think this in any way is any insult to our school systems. This is a statement that this whole area is very important. But on and against this amendment, my understanding is that the federal pass-fail rate for the immigrants is 60%. And I think that's what we're trying to do here, is to be consistent with the federal test. Second, if you can't reach 60%, student can't, they are probably ignorant of this and need to do some remedial study so that they are familiar with our Constitution, with some of the other fundamental principles here. 80%, you're starting to get up into the range where people slip up and make a mistake or two, and you'll have students who are basically familiar, getting caught occasionally, embarrassed, and may restrict some of their future options because they will have to go retake the test and get that done. So I think we're better off sticking with the bill at the 60%.
Senator Cole.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to shed a little light on a fact that when you're an immigrant, I think a high percentage of those folks, English is not their first language. So trying to pass a test is a challenge when you're having troubles comprehending English when it's not your first language. We're asking students who are, I assume, the majority, much more than the people trying to pass a test for being a U.S. citizen, are proficient in English. I don't think it's a lot to ask for them to perform at a higher level. I think that our teachers are obviously capable and able to teach this to the children, and with that, they will, in fact, be successful. And if they're not, well, that's part of learning. Failure is your best teacher, and I know they'll proceed to move forward and pass. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and for the amendment. Fellow senators, I'd just like to read you some of the questions from the test. What is the form of government of the United States? What is the supreme law of the land? Name one thing the U.S. Constitution does. The U.S. Constitution starts with the words, "We the people." What does "we the people" mean? These are the questions on this test, and I don't think it's a stretch to require 70% proficiency in something as important as our Constitution, our form of government. And so with that, on and for the amendment.
No for Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rarely get in the space of education debates, but I do think, again, it is fundamentally important that those questions that are on that citizenship test are in fact covered in our Wyoming K through 12 schools. And in order to pass, it's my recollection, you needed at least a 60%, and that was a D, not great. Your parents were calling, wondering what's going on, and you probably needed some remedial help. C is what it was, I think, in order to pass. If we're wanting to have a higher standard for our high school government class or our 5th grade civics courses that are taking place, let's go ahead and have those conversations. But these questions are currently being tested in our Wyoming schools. It's important for us to recognize that now, right? Because you know it. How did you learn it? In school from a really great teacher. When you first started your morning after saying the Pledge of Allegiance. So this bill does suggest that our schools are not doing that. Otherwise, why would we be voting on this bill and needing to bring it forward? So I just want that recognition. It's either needed or it isn't.
Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, I visited with the bringer of this amendment just a little bit, and the one thing that I don't think has been mentioned is that we have a different crew of kids out there now than we had when some of us went to school. And I asked, are there any modifications for our special ed students? And some of our students that come over here and don't speak English very well, and there aren't in this amendment. And so I'm definitely going to vote against the amendment for that reason. Do they get some extra help? Yes. We do have, people that work with them one-on-one quite often. But honestly, some of you really probably should go into some of our public schools and see what kind of, how kids have changed. And all we're really asking here is more tests. And I think that's what's really ruining education right now, is we start testing kids when they're kindergartners. They're the most tested people on the planet, 3 and 4 times a year. And if that's all we're trying to do is to see whether or not our teachers are teaching this, go to the schools and really go into a social studies class and see, or a government class and see. As the good senator from Cheyenne mentioned, these things are being taught in our schools. And they already have many, many hoops they have to jump through to be able to graduate. And do I think that most of the students that we have in Wyoming are doing really quite well? I think sometimes we forget that some of our scores are some of the tops in the nation, but it would appear with some of these amendments and some of these bills that we don't think they're doing a very good job. And I disagree with that. And I think we need to kind of take a look and go into your schools. I really would ask all of you to do that. And again, I understand the bringer of the bill, the bringer of the amendment. I understand what they're trying to do, but honestly, I just think we've got to take a look at the folks that are out there, the parents that we have, the kids that we have, the different things that are going on in their life that probably weren't going on in our lives 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, some of us 50 years ago. So I would ask you to vote against this amendment.
No further discussion. Question being called. We're on third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 114. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment has failed. Back on the bill. Senator Tinsky.
Thank you. I like the bill. I like the idea. I don't like the outcome, which is we're enforcing a mandate on the districts. I have 4 districts, and I've heard from all 4. They said, go in and read the current statute. It already requires civics education. It already requires this before you can graduate. It already specifies the grades that education must take place. What it's doing is mandating another test. And all 4 of them say, we are testing these kids and testing these kids and testing these kids. We only have so much time in the day. And you're already duplicating what we're doing. So one of them sent me the Wyoming Social Studies Content and Performance Standards, which arises out of our mandate as to what a minimum education constitutes. 7 pages of this are on civics and the United States Constitution and the laws of the state of Wyoming. So they have benchmarks to demonstrate proficiency. So they say, first of all, content standard 1, students analyze how people create and change structures of power, authority, and governance to understand the continuing evolution of government and demonstrate civic responsibility. Then they break out for every single grade what they are supposed to learn. By the end of grade 2, understand schools, communities, and the United States have rules that have to be followed. Identify the symbols and traditional practices that honor patriotism in the United States. This is what every class is supposed to teach. Identify people and events that are honored on United States holidays. Understand that the rules in the United States are called laws. That's second graders. Then we go up to what's expected by grade 5 and grade 8. Grade 8, explain the rights, duties, and responsibilities of a U.S. citizen. Explain how to participate in the political process. Explain the historical development of the United States Constitution and how they have shaped the United States and Wyoming government. Understand the difference between United States civil and criminal legal systems. Describe the structures of the United States and the Wyoming Constitution. It's all there. We require proficiency or demonstrate at least a basic understanding of all these things as a condition. What my superintendents are saying, all you're doing is adding one more test. We're already doing this. So on balance, I like the bill, but one more mandate from Cheyenne, one more test for kids in the classroom. So on balance, I have to come out as a no on the bill, regretfully, Mr. President.
Senator Landon.
Mr. President, thank you. Very eloquently done from the back of the room. And to my good friend from Sheridan County, boy, I really don't blame him for all that he just said. That's a school district up there that he represents that happens to be a multiple year-in-a-row champion of the Up With People program that, and I pardon me for the formal name, but we have a competition here in Wyoming where these students get together and they compete against each other. And that's a school district that has represented our state at the national level. And I'm proud to say that my district has a high school that's trying to catch up to them and doing pretty darn well. That piece that the senator from Sheridan County pointed out is the reason that I'll be a no on the bill. We have begun work about 5 years ago to try to cull the system of all this testing that we've been doing in our public schools. And we haven't done very well at it. And here we go, turning the boat around, going right back in the wrong direction to mandate another test. And
Mr. President, I'll be a no on the bill. Thank you.
Senator Drew.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just two on and against. I know it's popular. I too like the idea, but we had a fella come in here just the other day, Mr. President, and I think he was a teacher of the year. Specifically recall him saying that test less, let us teach more. I thought I heard that, and I thought I heard that right there. And to take it a little bit farther, one of the things that I do, and I know a lot of members of this body do, and so I just don't think it needs to be reminded, but I'll mention it lightly. We have a great program run by a gal downstairs for fourth graders where you can go and do a day in the legislature. I do it every year with every fourth grade class in every school in my district. And we walk through and we take a bill, we split the kids up into groups and they're committees of the legislature, and they work a bill, they work it through, and they vote on it. And I usually take a representative with me, and he plays the governor and he vetoes the bill, and we try to override it. And then I take my daughter, and she's the Supreme Court justice, and she throws the whole thing out. And so just to show them how a bill works, and work through it. And if you don't do that, if you're one of the few that don't partake in that program, you should, because then you're part of the solution. And part of the solution that I think that the good senator's getting at with this bill, but I don't think is necessary, that I think actually we can all be a part of. So I urge you to take that. I urge you to listen to the Teacher of the Year and vote no. Thanks.
Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. President. I really like the concept of the bill, but I took it to the source. I went and talked to my grandsons about this. Get their feeling for where they are on the Constitution, their understanding of it. And I think probably they have a better understanding, better knowledge of the Constitution than a lot of people in this room. Parliamentary procedure, they learned that one into the other through FFA. We had a really great Teacher of the Year here a couple of days ago. We had one a couple of years ago from my school who really put those values and those lessons into my grandsons. My grandson will be in this gallery here in a couple of weeks with his government class, which consists basically of the entire senior class of his high school. These kids are learning these things, and maybe they don't retain them long enough out, but maybe a lot of us didn't because we don't use it nearly enough. So I like the concept, but I'm gonna trust my grandkids' intuition on this and say they've got this figured out, and they're tired of that concept of teaching to the test, which is what this is gonna build more of, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. President, I've had the opportunity to meet my colleague's grandson, and he's one of the most intelligent individuals I've ever been around. So I would say he provides wise counsel, but I think he's an exception. But how would I know that? How would I know that he's exceptional? Compared to who? His peers? And this state or this outstanding school district that we've talked about here? Why do we do ACT tests? Is the argument that I've heard here. We teach all this stuff, so we shouldn't do any testing. You're just gonna go to college because you got a high school degree, so you don't need to test for an ACT. We don't need to test for PAWS anymore, and any other programs to measure proficiency. We test them for math, we test them for science, we test them for language arts. The only thing we're saying is we just need some standard to be able to measure efficacy. How effective is the instruction we're getting? This could be woven right into the curriculum. It would just be a regular test that they get in their high school civics class. It's the only thing we're talking about here. This is just a measurement to make a determination. This is the instruction that all students are receiving, not the exceptional ones or not the school district. How does one school district measure in the other as far as proficiency and efficacy in the instruction of the Constitution? I don't know. I can't find it in any of the standard testing that we do today. So I don't know that this is a giant burden so much as that you say we think that it's an important component of education and weave it into your normal curriculum under the Constitution and just show us that the results are actually working. It's all we're doing is say is provide us the data that shows that the instruction is effective and working.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate the discussion on this, and I think it highlights a lot of things that are going on with our K through 12 system in general. I remember this issue has come up before this legislature. I think I voted for it because as a new member of the Education Committee when I was first elected, I was asking those questions. How are our kids doing on social studies? Are they learning about the Constitution? I think there's a real concern out there. And we don't gather a statewide assessment. There's no statewide assessment mechanism for us to determine that right now. Unlike things like reading, math, science, where we have the YTOP, we look at NAEP scores, and we rightfully question, are the cut scores where we set those cut levels, are they appropriate? What does it mean when we say that 50% of our kids are reading below the proficient level? There's some real issues, and it's important for us to be really thoughtful and careful about how we look at scores. Just to draw an analogy, and I'm struggling with this because I've supported this bill in the past. In reading, for example, just because we want something to be doesn't necessarily mean we just with the stroke of a pen say it's going to happen. Say we don't like that 50% of our kids are reading at a basic or less than proficient level. So our solution is just to mandate it, and if you don't meet that threshold, then you don't graduate. If we start doing this with other very critical areas in our content performance standards, we need to be thoughtful about that. Imagine if we did that in reading, in science, in math. We've got to be thoughtful about what we're doing here. So I think in prior years, there is this concern about just saying you don't get to graduate. I do think if we start setting that as the new standard, we are going to start teaching to the test. So that's, the concern I have with this bill. The pros I have with it certainly are that I think we are seeing that people don't have these basic concepts mastered. Certainly when I've gone door to door and you explain to people you're running for the legislature, even in Cheyenne, they have no clue what that means. They think you want to run for Congress. And so I understand the need for it, but I guess my caution is this to the bringers of this bill. There are a lot of things we put in our education statutes just because we write it and expect it. I would hope that we would follow up at the very minimum to see if we can get the scores, if we mandate these tests, to start understanding what that is, to understand how many kids we are holding back for extra remediation through a summer program or through the fall of their 5th high school year. There's more follow through that needs to be done, but I just want to caution us, just because we want something really, really bad and we put it on a piece of paper doesn't magically make it happen. So with that, just vote it up, vote it down, but those are my concerns.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I'll ask you to vote it up in this case. Mr. Chairman, let's look at what we're talking about here. We're not talking about a major test. We're talking about 10 questions. How long test is that going to take? 10 minutes, 15 minutes, something like that? My expectation for what's going to happen is that we're going to find that somewhere between 5 and 15% of the kids don't pass it when you first try it, maybe a little more. You have to pass it to get the high school diploma. There's 100 questions there. They're going to have to go back and study those 100 questions, and they're going to learn something in that process. So, and then they have to take the test again, and I think eventually virtually all of them will pass it. And that requirement will mean that the test works to get all the students to some basic level. It's not going to be a big time eater, Mr. President. It's not a big test, but it will require some students that really haven't learned much of anything in this area. It will require them to learn something, and I think that's worthwhile. So, Mr. President, I'm for the bill.
Question being called. We are on third reading, Senate File 114. The clerk will call the roll.
Third reading roll call vote, Senate File 114. Anderson? No. Baldwin? No. Barlow? No. Beitman? Aye. Boner? No. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? No. Cooper? No. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Furphy? No. Guru? No. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? No. Kinsky? No. Cole? Aye. Landon? No. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? No. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? No. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll?
No.
No. Closing vote. Closing. Ellis, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 114, 15 aye, 16 no.
Senate File 114, having failed to receive the affirmative vote of the majority members elected to the Senate, Senate File 114 has failed to pass the Senate. Third readings, Senate Joint Resolution number 3.
Senate Joint Resolution 3, Property Tax Exemption for the Elderly and Infirm, sponsored by Senator Dockstader. A joint resolution to amend the Wyoming Constitution by authorizing a homeowner's property tax exemption for the elderly and infirm.
Thank you. We're voting on Senate Joint Resolution number 3. This is a constitutional amendment. It will take a 2/3 majority for passage. The chief clerk will call the roll.
Third reading roll call, Senate Joint Resolution 3, a constitutional amendment. Anderson? No. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner? No. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? No. Furphy? No. Guru? Aye. Hicks? No. Hutchings? No. Ide? No. Jones? Aye. Kinsky? Aye. Cole? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? No. McEwen? No. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate Joint Resolution number 3, 21 aye, 10 no.
Senate Joint Resolution 3, having received the affirmative vote of 2/3 of the members elected to the Senate, Senate Joint Resolution 3, Property Tax Exemption for the Elderly and Infirm, has passed the Senate. Senator Ellis.
Mr. President, having voted on the prevailing side of Senate File 114, I would ask for immediate, sorry, missing my script here. I'd ask for an immediate vote on a motion to reconsider Senate File 114.
Okay, folks, we are on a reconsideration vote for Senate File 114. Once again, the first vote is for reconsideration. Should that pass, the second vote will be back on the bill. Chief Clerk will call the roll.
For reconsideration motion for Senate File 114. For the reconsideration, Anderson? No. Baldwin? No. Barlow? No. Beitman? Aye. Boner? No. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? Cooper? Cooper? Aye. Cooper, no. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis?
No.
No. French? Aye. Murphy? No. Guru? No. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? No. Kinsky? No. Kolb? No. Landon? No. Larson? Aye. McCune? Aye. Nethercott? No. Case? No. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? No. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll?
No.
No. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. For reconsideration. 14 aye, 17 no.
Senator Case.
Kind of a minor point of order. When we ask for a motion on a bill, we shouldn't do it just by number. We should also include the catch title. So the catch title wasn't included in anything, even the call for the vote.
You're correct.
Thank you, sir.
I stand corrected and I apologize. The reconsideration vote on Senate File 114, constitutional instruction and examination requirements, has failed. Senator Larson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Having voted on the prevailing side of Senate File 54, I move for immediate reconsideration of the third reading vote on Senate File 54, Judges Housing Allowance.
All right, one more time. Folks, we're voting on reconsideration on Senate File 54, Judges Housing Allowance. First vote will be a vote for reconsideration. Should that pass, we'll vote on the bill again. Chief Clerk will call the roll.
For reconsideration motion, Senate File 54, Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Beitman? No. Boner? No. Bouchard? No. Brennan? No. Case? No. Cooper? Aye. Dockstetter? No. Ellis? No. French? No. Murphy? Aye. Guru? No. Hicks? No. Hutchings? No. Ide? No. Jones? Jones? No. Kinsky? Aye. Cole? No. Landon? Aye. Larson? No. McCune? No. Nethercott? No. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? No. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? No. President Driscoll?
No.
No. Cooper? Aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. For reconsideration of Senate File 54, 10 aye, 21 no.
Reconsideration vote on Senate File 54, Judges Housing Allowance, has failed the Senate. Bill will stay as is. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, we're at that order of business. Excuse me. Senator Beitman, thank
Privilege
you.
of the floor, please.
Excuse me?
Privilege of the floor, please.
It's granted.
Thank you, Mr. President. For the new members and those out listening to what we've been doing the last couple of days on these reconsideration votes, I think we owe the public and the new members an explanation of what is really happening and a discussion on why we're bringing these motions to reconsider, just as a point of clarification, because I'm sure the public is thoroughly confused as to what's going on. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Rothfuss, you want to do our explanation for us? Mr. Minority Floor Leader.
Sure, Mr. President. Mr. President, for the public and for the new members, reconsideration is in order exactly one time. The first vote is to decide whether or not there's reconsideration. That vote is by a majority of the members present on that final question. So if a majority of the members present choose to do a reconsideration vote, then the vote is put back into its original position with no possibility of debate, and then it is re-voted upon. As we've been doing, that's third reading, so that requires then for passage, assuming that the reconsideration vote passed, it would require a majority of those duly elected. So you can actually pass a reconsideration vote request with a much smaller minority than it takes to then do the reconsideration. I noted at the beginning, Mr. President, that it can be done exactly one time. So in the instance of immediate reconsideration, the intent is to lock in the vote. As I was told by the good senator whose statue is in the front of the room, Hank Coe, if a bill dies upon reconsideration, that bill is dead, not just dead, because no further action can be taken on it without a 2/3 rule suspension. That's what it would take to revive something after you had it dead. The reason for using it as a parliamentary procedure is often to solidify a vote on some circumstances. I don't know the motivation of anybody raising reconsideration over the last couple of days, but most of those looked to me like solidification votes. In other words, keep things the way they are and don't let them be reversed. Other times it is because it's believed that there's been an error in the vote, and perhaps upon further information, somebody who, for example, voted to kill a bill realizes, oh, we need that bill. Mr. President, I think we did that a few days ago, actually, where there was a reconsideration of a vote upon further reflection that perhaps we made the wrong choice. Over the years, more often, in my view, it's been voting to bring a bill back that passed away, perhaps through an early demise upon further reflection. But that's not the only purpose for it. I believe that covers most of the reason why it's used and the protocol. One other point, you can ask for reconsideration at a later date. This is important to know, and maybe not everybody knows this. I could go to the chief clerk and say, I would like to have this bill reconsidered tomorrow morning, and I would like the bill held. If the bill has not left the chamber, which for Senate files, it's not going to leave the chamber, but for a House bill, it'll probably leave the chamber at the next recess. But if you ask before it leaves and say, I would like to reconsider this legislation tomorrow at noon, the chief clerk will hold that for further consideration. But as I mentioned, there's only one reconsideration. So if somebody stands up before then and says, but I would like to reconsider it right now, then that motion has priority over your suggestion that you'd like to reconsider it later. You can also make an announcement to the chamber that you would like to reconsider something at a later date, but then somebody could stand up and say, I would like to call for immediate reconsideration, which has priority. Thank you, Mr. President.
Very nice explanation. Thank you. Senator Boner. Without objection, so ordered. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, we're at that order of business. Consideration of bills on general file.
Mr. President, I move that we stand in recess until 2 p.m.
Thank you. Are there any announcements? Senator Kinski.
Mr. President, your Appropriations Committee number 2 will meet today upon noon recess, let's say after lunch, let's say quarter after noon, in room W113, to finish consideration of SF 146, state-funded capital construction, and to take up SF 166, border wall and sanctuary city transport, Senate File 169, state shooting complex task force, and Senate File 90, Wyoming Property Tax Relief Authority.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources Committee, will meet today upon adjournment in room W2 and online to consider Senate File 170, specifying additional beneficial uses of water.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, will meet bright and early at 7:30 a.m. tomorrow. Please drink lots of caffeine. We're going to hear the following bills: Senate File 80, Visitation Rights; Senate File 43, EMS Districts; Senate File 111, Child Abuse, Change of Sex; Senate Journal 10, Right of Healthcare Access Constitutional Amendment.
Senator Biden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 3, Revenue, will meet 30 minutes upon noon recess in Capitol Extension Room W4 to take up the following bills: Senate File 110, Personal Property Tax Exemption, and Senate File 101, Wyoming Legal Tender Act Amendments. Thank you.
Third case.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Your committee number 7, Corporations, will meet at 12:30 in room 110 West down on the main floor of the Capitol. We'll be taking up Senate File 142, Carbon Capture and Sequestration. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Landon.
Mr. President, thank you. Your Committee 1, Judiciary, heads up for tomorrow morning. We will meet at 7:30 in W4 downstairs to take up the following bills: Senate File 167, Domestic Violence Protection Hearings, Remote Appearance; Senate File 120, Restoration of Civil Rights, that's a continuance from a couple of days ago; and Senate File 129, Background Checks, Governor's Office.
Thank you, Senator Landon. Senator Dockstader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee number 9, Minerals, Business, and Economic Development, will meet tomorrow, Friday, January 27, 15 minutes after the noon recess, to take up bills: Senate File 154, Energy Authority Project Financing Refineries; Senate File 156, Oil and Gas Force Pooling Good Faith Negotiations. Thank you, Mr. President.
You've heard the motion. All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, no. Stands recessed until 2 p.m.